Welcome to HOA anger. She used parking enforcement like a personal grudge. I care what the policy says, I said, but Colleen shouted that she was tired of my excuses and she wanted my car gone. Her hand was already waving toward the tow truck, idling at the curb, the driver leaning against the door with his arms crossed. The wheel lift gleamed in the midday sun like a promise. I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, in a neighborhood called Woodland Crossing Terrace Association, and for the last 3 months, this place has felt less like home and more like a battlefield. I work as a plumber, and most days I just want to come back, shower off the job site grime, and not think about chalk marks on tires or clipboards full of violations. But Colleen Lewis, the landscaping committee lead who also happens to run parking enforcement like a personal vendetta machine, has other plans. She complains daily. About everything. Guest cars. Permit decals. Tire positions. Fire lane proximity. Street parking duration. If it has wheels and it is within 100 feet of her line of sight, she has an opinion and a citation slip ready. The first notice showed up 2 weeks ago. I walked out to my driveway at 6 in the morning, coffee in hand, ready to load my tools and head to a job site. And there it was, a bright orange violation notice slapped on my windshield like a parking ticket. The paper fluttered in the breeze. I peeled it off and scanned it. The text was formatted like a ransom note, all caps headers and bolded deadlines that made no sense. It claimed my vehicle was parked illegally in a guest spot. Except I was not in a guest spot. I was in my own driveway. My assigned spot. The spot I have parked in every single day for the last year. I called the HOA office. Got voicemail. Left a message. No callback. I sent an email. Got an auto reply that said someone would respond within 3 business days. 3 days passed. Nothing. Then I got a second notice. This one had a 48-hour deadline and a $50 fine. It said my permit decal was not valid because it was slightly crooked. I looked at the decal. It was maybe 2 degrees off center. Maybe. You would need a protractor to call it crooked. Colleen showed up the next morning while I was loading my van. She had her clipboard, her visor pulled low, and that tight smile she wears when she is about to ruin your day. She walked right up to my bumper and tapped the decal with her pen. Not valid, she said. I told her it was the same decal the HOA office issued to me 6 months ago. She clicked her pen twice, like she was loading a weapon, and said the rules changed. New decals required. I asked when the rules changed. She said it was in the minutes. I asked which meeting. She said I should have attended. I told her I work nights half the week and I cannot attend every meeting. She said that was not her problem and walked away. That was when I realized this was not about parking. This was about control. Colleen runs the landscaping committee, but she has her fingers in everything. Parking, violations, guest permits, common area access. She treats the neighborhood portal admin tools like her personal surveillance system. I started asking around. Turns out I am not the first. A neighbor 2 streets over told me Colleen had his car towed last year because he parked on the street overnight during a family emergency. Another neighbor said Colleen tried to file a lien packet against her for having a work truck in her driveway. The HOA backed off when the neighbor threatened to lawyer up, but the pattern was clear. Colleen picks a target, buries them in notices, and does not stop until they either move or break. I went to the next HOA board meeting. It was held in the community center, a bland room with folding chairs and a long table at the front where the board sat. Colleen was there, sitting at the end with her clipboard and her pen. I waited through 20 minutes of landscaping budget discussions and pool maintenance updates. When public comment opened, I stood up. I said I had been getting violation notices for my own driveway, that my permit decal was issued by the HOA office, and that I wanted to know what rule I was violating. Colleen did not even look up. She just said the board would review my concerns and respond in writing. The board president nodded and moved to the next topic. 2 days later, I got a third notice. This one said my vehicle was parked in a fire lane. I took photos. My car was in my driveway, nowhere near a fire lane. The closest fire lane marker was a full block away. I printed the photos, attached them to an email, and sent them to the board. No response. I called the management company that handles the HOA account. They said they would look into it. A week passed. Then I got a notice that said the HOA was initiating a lien process against me for unpaid fines. The total was $350. The ledger attached to the notice had mystery line items: parking violation, permit violation, fire lane obstruction, administrative processing fee, late fee, collection fee. None of it made sense. The deadlines did not match. The dates were backdated. One notice said I had 14 days to respond. Another said I had already missed the deadline. I called an attorney. The consult cost me $200, but it was worth it. The attorney looked at the lien packet and said it was garbage. The HOA had not followed proper procedure. They had not sent certified mail. They had not provided a hearing. The ledger was full of duplicate charges and dates that did not line up. He said I could fight it, but it would take time and money, and in the meantime, Colleen could keep piling on violations. He told me to keep every piece of paper, every email, every photo. He said if the HOA was manipulating minutes and agendas to erase objections after meetings, that was a paper trail I could use. I asked what he meant. He said Colleen had a reputation. She had been sued twice by other homeowners for retaliation and selective enforcement. Both cases settled quietly. The HOA paid out, but Colleen stayed in her role. I started keeping records. Every morning I checked my car for new chalk marks. Colleen had a pattern. She walked the neighborhood every other day with a roll of chalk, marking tires like she was tagging evidence at a crime scene. If your tire had not moved by the next pass, she called it a violation. Never mind if you work from home. Never mind if you are sick. Never mind if you just do not drive every single day. The chalk mark was proof, and proof was all she needed. I took photos of every mark. I logged the dates and times. I checked the HOA portal for rule changes. Nothing was posted. I requested copies of the meeting minutes. The office sent me a PDF that was missing pages. I requested the full set. They sent me the same file. I filed a formal records request under state law. They ignored it. Then a delivery driver blocked the main lane for 30 seconds while dropping off a package at my neighbor's house. Colleen was out walking. She saw it. She took a photo. By the end of the day, the HOA had sent out an email blast announcing a crackdown on unauthorized parking, guest parking abuse, and commercial vehicle violations. The email said the board was authorizing immediate towing for repeat offenders. No warning, no appeal process, just tow on site. I came home from a job site 2 days later and found a tire clamp on my front wheel. The clamp was bright yellow, the kind you see in private parking lots with aggressive enforcement policies. There was a notice zip-tied to my door handle. It said my vehicle was immobilized due to outstanding violations and unpaid fines. It said I had 24 hours to settle the account or the vehicle would be towed. The notice included a phone number for a towing company I had never heard of. I called it. The guy who answered said the HOA had a contract with them. He said the tow fee was $200, plus a $75 immobilization fee, plus a daily storage fee if the car went to the yard. He said if I did not pay by 5 p.m. the next day, they would tow it. I asked if I could dispute the violations first. He said that was between me and the HOA. He just handled the towing. I called the HOA office again. Got voicemail again. I sent another email. I drove to the management company office in person. They said Colleen was authorized to enforce parking rules and that all violations had been documented. I showed them the photos I had been taking. I showed them the timeline. I pointed out that the dates on the lien packet did not match the dates on the original notices. The manager, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, sighed and said she would escalate it to the board. She said it could take a week. I told her I did not have a week. The tow deadline was tomorrow. She said there was nothing she could do. I went home and spent the evening digging through every document I had. I pulled up the HOA governing documents. I read through the parking rules section. The rule said vehicles could be towed for blocking fire lanes, abandoned vehicles, or safety hazards. There was nothing about decals. Nothing about guest parking limits in your own driveway. Nothing about overnight street parking bans. I checked the meeting minutes archive on the portal. The minutes from the last 6 months were incomplete. Whole sections were missing. I found references to votes that were not recorded. I found motions that passed without quorum logs. I started taking screenshots. Then I remembered something the attorney had said. He told me to check if the towing rule had been properly adopted. HOA rules have to be voted on and recorded. If the vote never happened, the rule is not enforceable. I pulled up the minutes from the meeting where the towing policy was supposedly approved. The minutes said the board discussed parking enforcement. They said the board agreed to explore options. But there was no vote recorded, no resolution, no policy language, just a vague discussion and a note that said further review needed. I checked the next meeting minutes. Same thing. Discussion, no vote. I went back a year. 2 years. The towing policy Colleen kept quoting was never properly adopted. The paperwork was blank. I kept my hands open and my voice calm, because the real move was still ahead. I did not call the towing company back. I did not pay the fine. I spent the next 12 hours building a case. I pulled every email, every notice, every photo, every screenshot. I cross-referenced the dates. I highlighted the contradictions. I printed everything and put it in a binder. Then I made copies. 3 full sets. 1 for the board, 1 for the management company, 1 for the attorney. I labeled each section with tabs, timeline, notices, photos, meeting minutes, quorum logs, towing policy gap. The next morning, Colleen showed up with the tow truck. I was in my driveway, tools loaded, ready to head out. She walked up with her clipboard and her smug smile. The tow driver climbed out and started lowering the wheel lift. I told him to wait. He ignored me. Colleen said I had missed the deadline. I told her the policy was not valid. She laughed. She said I would bury you in notices until you run out of printer ink. She said it like a joke, but her eyes were cold. She meant it. The wheel lift slid under my front bumper. The hydraulic arm extended with a hiss. The driver was reaching for the hook chain. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Colleen stepped closer, blocking the camera angle. She said recording was not going to help me. She said I was in violation and the car was being towed. I said the towing rule was never adopted. She blinked. I said I had the meeting minutes. I said there was no vote, no resolution, no quorum log. I said the policy she kept quoting did not exist. She told me I was lying. I opened the binder. I pulled out the minutes from the meeting she kept citing. I showed her the page. I pointed to the line that said further review needed. I said that was not a vote. That was not a policy. That was a placeholder. The tow driver stopped. He looked at Colleen. She looked at the paper. Her face went tight. She said the board had authorized her. I said, show me the authorization. She said it was verbal. I said, verbal does not count. I turned to the tow driver. I said, if you tow this car without a valid policy, you are liable. He hesitated. I handed him a copy of the minutes. He read it. He looked at Colleen. He said he needed to call his dispatcher. Colleen told him not to call anyone. She said the HOA would back her up. The driver said he was not risking a lawsuit over a maybe. He retracted the wheel lift. The hydraulic arm hissed again as it pulled back. Colleen's face went red. She said this was not over. She turned and walked toward the mailbox cluster at the corner, pulling out her phone. I watched her dial. She was calling someone, probably the board president, probably the management company. I did not care. The car was still in my driveway. The tow truck was leaving. But I knew she was not done. Colleen does not quit. She escalates. I spent the rest of the day at work, but my mind was on the HOA. I called a board member I had met at a community event a few months back. His name was David, and he was one of the few people on the board who seemed to actually care about fairness. I told him what had happened. I told him about the towing attempt, the missing minutes, the policy gap. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said Colleen had been doing this for years. He said the board knew. He said most of them were too tired to fight her. She controlled the portal admin tools, the vendor contracts, the violation tracking system. If you crossed her, she made your life hell. He said he had tried to bring it up at meetings, but Colleen always had an excuse, and the board president always backed her. He said he would help me, but it had to be off the record. He could not be seen opposing Colleen openly. Not yet. David sent me internal emails, not through the HOA system, through his personal account. The emails were between Colleen and the towing company. They showed a pattern. Colleen had a deal with the towing vendor. She got a commission for every tow. Not officially, not on paper, but the vendor sent her gift cards. Referral bonuses. David said it was buried in the contract as vendor appreciation incentives, but everyone knew what it really was. Colleen was profiting off the violations. Every fine, every tow, every immobilization fee fed back into her pocket. That was why she was so aggressive. That was why she never stopped. I added the emails to the binder. I printed them out. I highlighted the dates and the amounts. I cross-referenced them with the violation notices I had received. Every notice Colleen had sent me corresponded with a tow authorization in the vendor emails. She had been setting me up for weeks. The chalk marks, the crooked decal complaint, the backdated fines, all of it was designed to build a case for towing. And once the car was towed, I would be stuck paying fees to get it back. Fees that fed the vendor. Fees that fed Colleen. If you are enjoying this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA drama and neighborhood justice tales. The next board meeting was in 3 days. I marked it on my calendar. I told David I was coming. He said Colleen would try to shut me down. He said she always did. Public comment was limited to 3 minutes, and she had a habit of interrupting, claiming procedural violations, running out the clock. He said I needed to be fast and bulletproof. I said I would be ready. The night before the meeting, I got a text from David. It was a screenshot of a message Colleen had sent to the board president. The message said I was a disruptive homeowner. It said I was harassing her. It said I had threatened her during the towing incident. It said the board should consider banning me from meetings for creating a hostile environment. The message was dated that afternoon. It was a preemptive strike. Colleen knew I was coming, and she was trying to lock me out before I could speak. I did not sleep much that night. I ran through the presentation in my head. I checked the binder. I made sure every page was in order. I packed extra copies. I set 3 alarms. I could not afford to be late. I could not afford to miss this. The meeting room was packed. More people than usual. Word had gotten around. Neighbors who had been towed, neighbors who had been fined, neighbors who were just tired of Colleen. They filled the folding chairs and lined the walls. Colleen sat at the board table, her clipboard in front of her, her pen clicking. She looked calm. Too calm. She had her plan, and she thought it would work. The board president opened the meeting. He went through the usual agenda items. Budget updates. Maintenance reports. Landscaping proposals. Colleen gave a presentation on parking compliance improvements. She talked about the new towing contract. She said enforcement was up. Violations were down. The neighborhood was safer. She did not mention the commissions. She did not mention the missing policy votes. She made it sound like a success story. When public comment opened, I stood up. Colleen looked at me. Her pen stopped clicking. The board president said I had 3 minutes. I walked to the front. I put the binder on the table. I opened it to the first tab. I said my name and my address. I said I was here to address selective enforcement and policy violations by the parking committee. Colleen interrupted. She said I was out of order. She said I had not submitted my comments in advance. The board president looked uncomfortable. He said public comment did not require advance submission. Colleen said it was a new rule. The president said there was no new rule. She sat back, jaw tight. I kept going. I said I had been targeted with backdated violation notices, invalid fine assessments, and an attempted tow based on a policy that was never adopted. I flipped to the minutes tab. I said the towing policy Colleen kept citing was discussed, but never voted on. I pointed to the line that said further review needed. I said that was not a resolution. That was not a policy. That was a dead end. I said Colleen had been enforcing a rule that did not exist. The room went quiet. I heard someone in the audience whisper. Colleen stood up. She said I was misrepresenting the minutes. She said the board had given her verbal authorization. I said verbal authorization does not create enforceable policy. I said the governing documents require written resolutions and recorded votes. I flipped to the next tab. I said I had quorum logs that showed multiple meetings where votes were recorded without proper quorum. I said that meant those votes were invalid. I said the HOA had been operating outside its own rules for at least 2 years. The board president asked to see the binder. I handed it to him. He flipped through the pages. His face changed. He looked at Colleen. He asked if she had copies of the authorization documents. She said they were in the office. He said he wanted to see them. She said she would send them. He said he wanted to see them now. She said that was not possible. He closed the binder. He said the board would suspend parking enforcement actions until the policy documentation was reviewed and corrected. Colleen's face went white. I was not done. I flipped to the vendor emails tab. I said I had evidence that Colleen was receiving referral bonuses from the towing company. I said that created a financial conflict of interest. I said every tow she authorized put money in her pocket. I said that was why she was so aggressive. I said that was why she never stopped. I pulled out the printed emails. I handed copies to the board. I handed copies to the neighbors in the audience. I said the emails showed a pattern of incentive payments tied to tow volume. I said that was a violation of fiduciary duty. I said it was grounds for removal. The room erupted. Neighbors started talking all at once. Someone shouted that Colleen had towed their car last year. Someone else said they had paid fines for violations they never committed. David, the board member who had been helping me, stood up. He said he had been raising concerns about Colleen's enforcement practices for months. He said the board had ignored him. He said this was the proof they needed. He moved to suspend Colleen from her committee role, pending a full audit. Another board member seconded. Colleen tried to speak. The president told her to sit down. The motion passed. 4 votes in favor. 1 abstention. Colleen was out. But the night was not over. A neighbor in the back of the room stood up. She said she wanted to file a formal complaint against the HOA for harassment and retaliation. She said Colleen had towed her car while she was out of town caring for a sick relative. She said the tow fees had cost her $600. She said the HOA had refused to reimburse her. She said she wanted an audit of all towing actions for the last 3 years. Other neighbors joined in. One by one, they stood up and shared their stories. Cars towed without warning. Fines for violations that were never explained. Notices that arrived after the deadline had already passed. Lawns filed without hearings. It was a flood. The board could not ignore it. The president said the board would authorize an independent management audit. He said the audit would review all parking enforcement actions, vendor contracts, and financial incentives. He said the results would be published to the community. He said any homeowner who believed they had been wrongly fined or towed could file a reimbursement claim. He said the HOA would process the claims and issue refunds where appropriate. Colleen tried to object. The president cut her off. He said her portal admin access was being suspended immediately. He said she was no longer authorized to issue violations, authorize tows, or access enforcement records. He said the board would meet in executive session to determine further consequences. Colleen grabbed her clipboard and walked out. The door slammed behind her. The room was still buzzing. Neighbors were talking, comparing stories, exchanging contact information. David came over and shook my hand. He said I had just saved the neighborhood. I said I just wanted my car to stop getting targeted. He laughed. He said it was bigger than that now. He said this was going to force the board to clean house. He said Colleen had been the tip of the iceberg. The whole system was broken, and now it was all coming out. I left the meeting with the binder under my arm and a stack of business cards from neighbors who wanted to stay in touch. I drove home. The streets were quiet. The chalk marks were still on my tire, but they did not matter anymore. The enforcement was suspended. The audit was coming. Colleen was out. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The next morning, I got an email from the management company. It said my parking violations had been voided. It said my fines had been reversed. It said I would receive a refund check within 30 days. It said the HOA was conducting a full review of enforcement procedures and would notify residents of any policy changes. I printed the email and added it to the binder. 2 weeks later, the audit results were published. The report was 23 pages long. It detailed every towing action for the last 3 years. It showed that Colleen had authorized over 100 tows during that period. It showed that more than 60% of those tows were for violations that were either not documented or not supported by valid policy. It showed that Colleen had received incentive payments totaling over $8,000 from the towing vendor. It showed that the vendor contract had never been approved by the full board. It showed that Colleen had signed the contract herself, using her committee rule as authorization. The report concluded that the HOA had engaged in selective enforcement, failed to follow its own procedures, and created a financial conflict of interest that compromised the integrity of the enforcement process. The board voted to terminate the towing contract. They voted to void all fines issued under the invalid policy. They voted to reimburse every homeowner who had been wrongly towed or fined. They voted to strip Colleen of all committee roles and to ban her from holding any HOA leadership position for 5 years. They voted to adopt new enforcement procedures that required written policy, recorded votes, and independent oversight. They voted to require quarterly audits of all vendor contracts. The motion passed unanimously. Colleen tried to fight it. She hired a lawyer. She filed a demand letter claiming the board had violated her rights and defamed her. The board responded with their own letter, referencing the audit findings and the evidence I had provided. Colin's lawyer reviewed the documents and withdrew. A month later, Colleen put her house on the market. She moved out 6 weeks after that. I never saw her again. The HOA implemented the new procedures. Parking enforcement became transparent. Violations were documented with photos and timestamps. Fines were issued only for valid policy violations. Towing required board approval and advance notice. The portal admin tools were restructured so no single person controlled enforcement records. The neighborhood group chat, which had been silent for months, came back to life. Neighbors started talking again, organizing block parties, helping each other with yard work. It felt like a real community again. David ran for board president in the next election. He won. One of his first actions was to create a homeowner advocacy committee to review enforcement complaints and ensure fairness. He asked me to join. I said yes. I figured if I was going to live here, I might as well help make sure it did not turn into another Colleen situation. I still keep the binder. It sits on a shelf in my garage, next to my toolbox and my spare parts bins. I do not look at it often, but it is there. A reminder that records matter, that paper trails matter, that standing up matters. I learned that the hard way. But I learned it. The funny thing is, the whole thing might have ended differently if Colleen had just followed her own rules. If the towing policy had been properly adopted, if the fines had been legitimate, if the enforcement had been fair, I would have had no case. But she got sloppy. She got greedy. She thought the clipboard and the visor and the badge reel made her untouchable. She thought nobody would check the minutes. She thought nobody would keep records. She was wrong. The security camera footage was the final piece. I had installed a camera on my garage a year ago, just for general security. I did not think about it during the HOA fight until David mentioned that Colleen had been seen placing violation notices at night, when nobody was around. I checked my footage. Sure enough, there she was. 2 in the morning. Walking up my driveway with her clipboard and a stack of notices. She placed one on my windshield, took a photo with her phone, and walked away. The timestamp was 3 days before the notice claimed the violation occurred. She had backdated it. I pulled the footage, burned it to a drive, and added it to the binder. That was the metadata that proved Karen posted the notice herself. When I brought the footage to the next board meeting, I did not say anything at first. I just queued it up on my laptop and waited. When Colleen tried to claim that all her notices were issued in real time, I hit play. The room watched in silence as Colleen walked up my driveway in the middle of the night, placed the notice, and left. The timestamp was clear. The date was clear. The board president asked Colleen to explain. She said the camera must have been wrong. I said the camera was synced to network time and had never been adjusted. I said the metadata was embedded in the file. I said I had 3 other clips just like it, all showing the same pattern. I brought a printed evidence packet in a binder and slid copies to the board and the room at once. Colleen's smug smile vanished when the room turned on her. That was the moment everything shifted. Up until then, Colleen could spin the violations as legitimate mistakes, gray area judgment calls, homeowner misunderstandings. But the footage made it impossible. It proved intent. It proved manipulation. It proved fraud. The board had no choice. They stripped her of access to the portal admin tools immediately. They locked her out of the enforcement system. They revoked her committee credentials. They issued a formal censure. And they referred the matter to the county for potential fraud investigation. The county never filed charges. Colleen's lawyer negotiated a settlement where she agreed to repay the incentive payments to the HOA and to resign from all roles permanently. In exchange, the HOA agreed not to pursue criminal complaints. The settlement was confidential, but David leaked the general terms to me. I did not share them publicly, but I did not have to. The neighborhood knew. Word spread fast. Colleen was done. The HOA held a town hall 6 months after the audit. The new board presented the updated enforcement policies. They showed the reimbursement totals, over $40,000 returned to homeowners who had been wrongly fined or towed. They showed the new vendor contracts, all approved by the full board with transparent terms and no incentive clauses. They showed the new complaint process with independent review and clear timelines. They asked for feedback. The room was calm. A few people asked clarifying questions. A few people thanked the board for the changes. Nobody yelled. Nobody stormed out. It felt like a normal meeting. It felt like progress. I ran into one of the neighbors who had been towed by Colleen a year ago. She told me she got her reimbursement check. $650. She said it covered the tow fees and the storage fees and the administrative fees. She said she cried when she opened the envelope. She said she had given up on ever getting that money back. She said thank you. I told her I just did what anyone would do. She said no. Most people would have paid the fine and moved on. She said I stood up when nobody else would. She said that mattered. The tow yard closed down 8 months later. The vendor lost the HOA contract and could not replace the revenue. The yard was sold to a storage company. The tow trucks were auctioned off. I heard the owner moved to another state. I do not know if that is true, but I like to think it is. I like to think the whole operation collapsed under its own weight. The HOA stopped selective enforcement after complaints piled up. The new procedures worked. Violations were rare. Fines were minimal. Towing almost never happened. The neighborhood group chat shifted from complaints to coordination. People organized community cleanup days. They planned holiday decorations. They shared contractor recommendations. It felt like the neighborhood I thought I was moving into when I first signed the purchase papers. David asked me to help draft a homeowner bill of rights. It was a one-page document that outlined what homeowners could expect from the HOA and what the HOA could expect from homeowners. It included clear enforcement standards, transparent processes, and a commitment to fairness. The board approved it unanimously. It was posted on the portal, printed on flyers, and mailed to every household. I kept a copy on my fridge. I still look at it sometimes. It reminds me that systems can change, that people can push back, that fairness is not automatic, but it is possible. I still work as a plumber. I still come home tired most days. But I do not come home worried anymore. I do not check my windshield for violation notices. I do not photograph my tires. I do not keep a binder of evidence in my truck. I just park in my driveway, unload my tools, and go inside. It is a small thing, but it feels like everything. The neighborhood is not perfect. There are still disputes. There are still complaints. There are still people who do not follow the rules. But the difference is that now, the rules are real. They are written down. They are voted on. They are applied evenly. And when someone thinks they have been treated unfairly, they can file a complaint and get a real answer. That is all I ever wanted. That is all any of us wanted. Colleen's house sold fast. A young family moved in. They have 2 kids and a dog. They park in their driveway. They wave when I drive past. They do not know the history. They do not know what happened here. And that is fine. They do not need to know. They just need to live in a place where the rules make sense and enforcement is fair. They get to have that now. We all get to have that now. I see David at board meetings. He always has a coffee in one hand and a stack of papers in the other. He runs a tight meeting. He keeps things moving. He listens. He follows up. He is not perfect, but he is honest. And that is enough. The board is not a battleground anymore. It is just a board. Boring, functional, predictable. Exactly what it should be. I have been asked to run for the board. I have not decided yet. Part of me wants to. Part of me wants to just keep my head down and live my life. I have given enough time to the HOA. I have fought enough fights. But I also know that if I do not stay involved, someone like Colleen could come back. Maybe not her, but someone like her. Someone who sees the clipboard as a weapon. Someone who sees enforcement as profit. Someone who thinks rules are for other people. I cannot let that happen again. None of us can. So I keep showing up to meetings. I keep reading the minutes. I keep asking questions. I keep the binder on the shelf, just in case. Because the fight is not really over. It is just paused. And as long as I live here, I will be ready. Thanks for watching, and thanks for all the support.